6.2, and Ms. Natalini, if you would like to read the, I don't think you have to read that, actually, that's not a, all right, this is the first extension of and First Amendment to lease agreement between the City of Sarasota and Save Our Seabirds, adding an additional 20-year period through April 30th, 2038. And so as to set forth other amendments with regard to future use and possible expansion of the leasehold. And Facilities Asset Manager Shanley, if you could bring us up to date on what's going on.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners. Rob Shanley, Facilities and Asset Manager for the city. Along with me today is David Pilston, the CEO from Save Our Seabirds Incorporated. As you've already mentioned, before you today is the first extension of and First Amendment to the City Island Bird Rescue and Rehabilitation Center lease agreement between the City of Sarasota and Save Our Seabirds Incorporated. I will turn it over to David Pilston, CEO from Save Our Seabirds, so he can give a little presentation.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Commissioners, for having us here today. I know that several of you have been out to Save Our Seabirds at one time or another over the past few years, but for those who haven't, the mission of Save Our Seabirds is to rescue, rehabilitate, and release sick and injured birds while educating our community about the preventing injuries and preserving habitats. That's our mission. Our goal is to establish a lasting, world-class rehabilitation, education, and research organization that will continue to fulfill our mission for generations to come. Why is this important? Well, there are about 10,000 species of birds in the world. 1 in 8 is threatened with extinction over the next few decades. In the U.S., it's even worse. There are about 1,000 species of birds. 1/3 of them are threatened with extinction over the next few decades. We don't need to go into the reasons why, but those are the facts. Birds are an important part of the quality of life in Sarasota and also extremely important to our economy in tourism, agriculture, and ecological balance. At Save Our Seabirds, we receive over 4,000 bird rescue calls a year, and our goal is to rehabilitate and release every one of those birds. If you were to count all the birds that Save Our Seabirds has released successfully over the years and projected out normal reproduction patterns for those birds, there could be well over 1 million birds out there now that would not have been out there if it weren't for Save Our Seabirds. If we don't do that, who will? Birds that are not releasable are given permanent homes in our Wild Bird Learning Center, which is open and educating the public every day. If we don't do that, who will? We offer 4 fully accredited field trips through EdExplore SRQ, in which science teachers can bring their classes out, learn about nature up close and personal, and get full credit on their curriculum. If we don't do that, who will? Our rigorous college internship program has welcomed interns from Cornell, Penn State, University of Wisconsin, University of New Hampshire, University of Illinois, UC Santa Barbara, University of Minnesota, University of Arizona, New College, USF, and many others. If we don't do that, who will? We're an integral part of the Sarasota community, having collaborated in recent years on numerous education and outreach events with Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota County, Sarasota Culture Collective, Wrangling College of Art and Design, Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, Mote Marine Laboratory, South Florida Museum, Science and Environment Council of Southwest Florida, Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, Sarasota Bay Water Festival, Sarasota Audubon Society, Sarasota Farmers Market, many Rotary clubs, including Rotary Club of Sarasota, Boys and Girls Clubs of Sarasota, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Sarasota Family YMCA Youth Shelter, Easter Seals, and countless schools and church groups. If we don't do that, who will? In fact, Save Our Seabirds is the only organization in at least all of South Florida, and perhaps in all of Florida, who does all that we do. Now, I've been at SOS for 6 years. We have operated in the black every year. We have 0 debt, and we will never ask the city for a subsidy. Meanwhile, we've invested literally hundreds of thousands of dollars into improvements to the property on City Island. If any of you have been there in the past, or were there 6 years ago when I joined, you know what a terrible shape the place was in. But we've added new roofs, new air conditioning system, new floors, solar panels, completely put in a paver walkway, hundreds and hundreds of native plants, countless habitat rebuilds. Just in the past year, we've replaced all the cages in the hospital, completely overhauled the kitchen equipment, added 227 new native plants, constructed numerous new habitats, created a new career-oriented field trip to teach kids about careers available in our field, all while recovering from Irma. And today, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission considers us to be the model facility of our kind in the state of Florida, and wishes all other facilities were managed as well as ours is. Now, what about the future? Now, we view the departure of Moat Aquarium as an opportunity for us. In its absence, we hope to create a world-class destination attraction for tourism and environmental education. That will require, among other things, our first ever capital campaign. But in order to support a major capital campaign and secure capital grants, we must have a long-term lease to the property. Thank you.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Shanley or Vice Mayor?
I have a question about, it's on page 3 of 27 in the lease, about the boats and docks. If we could just get some clarification on that statement.
In the lease or the amendments?
In, yeah, the extension. It's on page 3 of 27 in our packet.
Did you want to address that?
Right, so, okay, well, we don't have any boats or docks at this point. The Pelican Man did. For those of you who've been around a while, you might remember the Pelican Man. The leasehold was larger then, and it included waterfront, and he actually operated boats from there. We don't have any waterfront, we don't have a dock, but we're thinking if we're going to put together a long-term lease, we're thinking about what contingencies we might want to include in the lease. But of course, anytime we would go for something like that, we would go through the normal major conditional use process to do it. So that's just a what if. It doesn't by any means say that we can do that today. We know we don't have a dock, but we're just thinking, what might be 20 years from now. I mean, 20 years ago, nobody heard of food trucks. So I mean, you never know what we might want to do in 20 years.
Commissioner Redding?
Page 2, same thing, food and beverage.
Exact same thing. We don't have food and beverage. We know that Moat does. Moat, we don't know what the future of Moat will be as far as their food and beverage. One of our goals as we develop more attractions at Save Our Seabirds is for people to linger longer and learn more and really internalize the lessons that they get from Save Our Seabirds about protecting the environment. And one way to do that is to give them, a sandwich and a Coke or something like that. And we can't do that now. All we have now is a soft drink machine. That's all we're allowed to have now. But this is another what if. Of course, we'd go again through the major conditional use process.
Did you have a question, Commissioner Shaw?
Yes, but I'll defer. I'll wait till all
Okay.
the questions are done and you give a summary.
I had a question.
Oh, you did have a question?
Yes,
Oh,
ma'am.
okay.
Just, how many people came through your gates?
About 25,000 per year, and thousands of school children, and through our field trips and our summer camps. We have a summer camp program with Sarasota County Parks and Rec. We have hundreds and hundreds of kids coming out through the summer, getting tours, getting up close and personal with nature and learning about adaptations and evolution and how to avoid injuries to these birds. Because if you think about the birds we've rescued and released, there might be 1 million birds out there, but how about the ones that haven't been injured because we've educated people how to avoid the injuries? And that's a big part of our mission is the education to help people avoid injuring these birds to begin with.
Did you have a follow-up? No. Vice Mayor?
So my question has to do with the 20-year portion of the lease, the request for 20 years. Where does that number come from? Why 20 years? Why not 12?
Well, as you know, we've come a long way as far as rehabilitating the facility, and we're just about done with all of the must-have repairs. Now we're in the process of a new strategic planning process with the board at Save Our Seabirds, and we have a full-day retreat in July where we're going to be hammering out our new strategic plan. And that's going to involve a lot of new, nice-to-have things we really want to have to become really a world-class destination attraction in the absence of the Moat Aquarium now. So we're going to be the only attraction out there, and so in order to do that, we're going to be going for some big grants, and we're going to be going for a major capital campaign, which we've never done. And you cannot ask for major grants, and you certainly can't ask for do a major capital campaign if you only have 10 years control of property.
Go ahead, you should follow.
Do you know what number they're looking for? Would 12 years satisfy for some of those major things?
No, I know our donors very well. Some of them are in their later years, and they want something that they know is going to be here for a long time, where their grandchildren can bring their grandchildren someday. And if you think about a 10-year lease or 12-year lease, if we were to start a capital campaign today, it could probably take us 2 years to raise the money and 2 years to get approvals, or maybe 3 to build. And now we're 5 years into a 10-year lease, and we don't have much use of it after that that's guaranteed.
Mr. Barwin? Mr. Brody?
I mean, this is the reality of public-private partnerships, whether they're nonprofit or private. Nobody is going to invest in the property if they can't go and say, we're going to have this for a substantial amount of time. Doesn't make financial sense. You're not going to get the investment. That's what this is a private-public partnership with a nonprofit that does a lot of good work and has for a long time in the community.
Yes, Mr.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Just a few summary comments. Earlier in the afternoon, a gentleman came forward and talked about the CCNA work product and their recommendations, having analyzed all 51 of the leases we have in place. And I want to say the staff, and I suspect the City Commission very much appreciates that effort. We have taken it to heart. We may need to schedule a workshop with the Commission to review that in terms of our other leases. That information came to us in midstream when we were wrapping up our conversations with Save Our Seabirds. But we have really looked at this lease with that information in hand, and I do appreciate David and company for pushing the lease request back from an initial 50 years to a more reasonable 20 years for their capital campaign. But with that said, the recommendations were for staff to be sure that these future leases were truly for nonprofit groups with a good public purpose that was worthy of our city. They clearly meet that, I think, requirement and aspiration. The recommendations out of CCNA asked our tenants to consider pursuing renewable energy goals, and they already have solar panels. Having met with them, I know that is near and dear to them. The recommendations including requiring our tenants to make their meeting spaces available to other not-for-profits if they weren't using them, and they do that already, and David is committed to that. In addition, the suggestions were that the city approve of any subleases. This lease does not allow subleases, so if they go out and pursue any, we will have to review those, approve those, and amend the lease accordingly. And that's the same with food and beverage. So with that background, I just wanted to explain that. Processing this was not intended to be in any way not respectful to CCNA's work and report, and I think in many of our leases, I wish we would have had that in place sooner. But this group really meets all of the requirements, I think, that were involved or incorporated in that report. The question is one of terms here. And with the terrific job that they do with their ambitious capital improvement plans, with Moat Marine and Aquarium leaving, it seems like an ideal opportunity to put these folks on even firmer ground and continue the work that David has started. So with that, we're recommending approval of this lease and subsequently asking for a workshop with for you to give us some direction in the future in terms of the CCNA reports and recommendations for future negotiations. Thank you.
Commissioner Eddy?
What's this property appraised at?
We do not have an appraisal. What we do have is the assessment. Bear with me one moment here. The just value for the tax assessment would be $2,650,500.
Follow-up, please.
Go ahead.
I am not comfortable with the language that speaks to the major conditional use as it relates to the boats and docks and to the sale of food and beverage. I think that the tenant can come back at any time for major conditional use if it appears that those uses may be in line either with the new strategic goals of the nonprofit or an expansion based on capital campaign. I just don't feel comfortable with that language being there, particularly in light of what Mr. Pilson has said, that there's not a plan to do either of those right now, that this won't be an impediment to that. I also think that we need to include a non-assignability clause in there. We've talked about subleases, but it doesn't speak as to whether or not this lease can be assigned. So I would request that that language be added. And I also would like to include language that Usually with an assignment, if the assignment is permitted by the landlord, then of course we know who the assignee is going to be, and we can confirm that that assigned use is also a nonprofit use, which keeps in line with the spirit of the lease agreement. I also would not be comfortable with more than 1 year of a 20-year renewal at this point, since we're going through the process of reviewing all of our leases, and so that gives us an option. We talked about the request for extending for 20 years with 1 renewable option. I wouldn't be comfortable going any further than that at this point, knowing that we're going to undergo this evaluation of municipal leases. But definitely applaud the work. I've been out to the site several times, and it's truly an asset for Save Our Seabirds to be there, the educational component. But I just think as we're looking at tightening up our leases and making sure that language is consistent, that we're not setting a precedent, particularly when there's another opportunity to come back for either a major conditional use or a lease revision. So those are my comments.
Well, if Commissioner
Go
Vice
ahead,
Mayor
Mr.
wants to go
Fulmer.
first, I can. To respond to the comments, first of all, I had asked to take a second look at this myself when I saw that language in there. I do agree with Commissioner Eddy's comment that really that language there has no legal significance in the sense that it doesn't impose an obligation or responsibility in either party, nor does it create a right in either party. It's just there by way of information that's contemplated in the future. That's fine. I was concerned that it might create an expectation on the part of the tenant that there was an entitlement to that, but that's been clarified on the record. You understand you need the major conditional use, but in my opinion, it would have no legal significance to take that out because they know they'd have to come back for that anyway. And there already is, if you look in the main lease, in paragraphs 28 and in paragraphs 42, I think there is a prohibition against assignment and a specific prohibition against subletting. So I just wanted to point out that in the future, if the tenant sought either to, have the dockage area or a food and beverage service, and that would entail a sublease, then you would want to come back and seek an amendment to the lease, and you'd have the ability to look at that sublease. And I felt that was a relevant issue because of the discussion that occurred a few months back out at Marine Max, I think it was, with the sublease out there. So that would mean that you would get to see a sublease because it's prohibited right now. That's in the main lease.
Vice Mayor?
Can you just clarify, get to see a sublease? Does that mean the city approves of it or just gets to read it?
Well, I think, right now it's prohibited. Any subleasing is prohibited. So what I mean to say is, say for a food and beverage service, that would entail a sublease. They would come in for an amendment to the lease, and you could condition your approval on the sublease of getting to see it and making it a public record and approving it.
Go ahead, follow up.
Yeah, so that was, my question was about the sublease issue. Wonderful organization. I was out, I toured it. The Pelican Man is, a childhood memory, and I love the work that you do. But it is, a fact that we are looking at some of our leases now and reviewing some of the things that we do. I agree with Commissioner Freeland-Eddy about those two portions of the lease. And I'm wondering if you would feel comfortable with those not being part of this.
The paragraphs pertaining to conditional use?
Yes, to food and beverage and the boat.
I don't think you want to strike the whole paragraph. I think you want to start, let's see, where it says on paragraph 9, where it begins, the parties, however, acknowledge the possibility of the sale of food and beverages in the future, and the same with the one on the dockage where it says the parties, however, acknowledge the possibility. From that point on is just informational, and it's on the record in any case. So you could strike that, I think, with no change in the legal rights or duties of either party.
And same for paragraph 15. It's votes.
Yes.
But, Mr. City Attorney, that would not preclude them from pursuing those items.
Absolutely not. They have that right whether that's in here or not.
I think the
So,
purpose was to just
they
make
could
sure
always-
everybody knows what they're thinking about.
like I said, it was informational, but it there's nothing in here that would take away your right to do that.
Commissioner Eddy?
And to be clear, to the extent that, we're furthering the nonprofit purpose of the organization, the goal is that anything that's added to the lease goes to the nonprofit purpose. And I mean, it could legitimately be questioned, whether or not, a boat dock and those types of things legitimately further the public interest of a nonprofit as opposed to becoming an income stream. And the next argument is, well, if you can afford to do a boat and a dock, then you can afford to pay more rent. I mean, it's just, you know, and we've all got expenses, and we know, we've seen your statements. But in terms of when we're looking at it, you know, to the extent that those things are in close proximity with the goals of the nonprofit, that comes through seeing the lease and making the determination as to whether or not there is any cash flow, or it helps to just underwrite expenses, you know.
Well, the purpose of the boats would not be to compete with the barge or anything like that. It would be for bird watching tours. With some of our highly trained docents, one of them is here today, who was itching to get out and give bird watching tours to children of all ages throughout the rookeries. And so that's what that would be for, to further our mission, our educational mission.
And as they, you know, as they said, or as the attorney said, everything would have to come back to us anyway for approval. So I think I feel comfortable with it. Any other discussion? We have one person that signed up to speak, Jim Lample.
Thank you, Mayor. Jim Lample. It's ironic I'm on both sides of this subject. I'm a big supporter of Save Our Seabirds, as David knows. I underwrote the installing of plaques for instructions on what to do if a seabird was in risk or in danger. And so I'm happy to keep supporting them. I'm also delighted in the critical thinking that this commission's undertaking in evaluating leases, especially nonprofits. So my hat's off to you for proceeding on the recommendations that the CCNA task force promulgated. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the work that David and Save Our Seabirds does. Thank you from both sides.
Thank you.
Make a motion.
Yeah, go ahead.
Motion to approve this first extension of the First Amendment to the City Island Bird Rescue and Rehabilitation Center lease agreement.
Commissioner Shaw,
Does that include the conversation that was?
That's fine, yep.
with the amendments that.
As amended?
Delete those.
As amended.
Okay, per the boat docks and the food service.
Then I
Yeah,
would second.
that's fine.
I would second your motion.
Okay, Commissioner Eddy.
We still haven't addressed whether or not we're keeping this option to renew for 2 additional 10-year terms.
You want that in your motion, or you want to?
I mean, I'm okay with it. It's, if it helps them raise some money, they're not, hopefully not going anywhere. I mean, if they go under or leave, you know, we will take possession of the property anyway. So, you know, that's fine with me. I think that'll help them raise some money.
Do you still,
As a seconder, I have no problem with the.
okay. Any other discussion on the motion? Commissioner Eddy.
I don't have any problem with having the long-term lease for the purpose of being able to provide the funding, but I think that there needs to be some review mechanism in between so that we can make sure that we're doing due diligence as it relates to, you know, the financials in keeping with the nonprofit purpose, you know, those types of things. And so long as that does happen, I don't have any problem with it, but my concern is that on a broader scale that's not happening, which is why we're having this lengthy discussion anyway. So we shouldn't have to wait for a renewal to be able to look at the terms and to ensure that there's not just compliance on paper with the numbers, but that, you know, the financial report, the in keeping with the nonprofit, the other things. I just think that this needs to happen intentionally, you know.
Mr. Barwin?
I believe there's a section in here, correct me if I'm wrong, that requires the annual submittal of the financial reports, which triggers an internal process to review the lease to be sure everything's consistent with the intent and the provisions in the lease.
I mean, I know it's in there, but I don't know whether it's being done.
Well, that's what we do. And we'll double down on it based on this conversation, but the renewal is a mutual consent, so it's not an automatic renewal for the 10 years. I just wanted to clarify that. If we have a problem or an issue, then we're not bound to have an automatic renewal, just if this tenant asks.
Okay.
And to be clear, I'm not presuming any problems. I'm just saying that in terms of process and procedure, if we're going to do it, let's do it.
Any other discussion, Vice Mayor?
Then I have a question. How does this differ from the lease that we had for the renewal for Marine Max when they came up for renewal and we were essentially instructed that we had to
It was
renew?
one-sided. The renewal was one-sided.
Well, that was for approval of improvements, and there had been the renewal that had been negotiated 2 years prior when their desire to do those improvements had all been disclosed, and there was that attachment, so it does differ in that regard.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that.
All right. Any other discussion? All right, let's vote. Commissioners, is that your vote?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes. Congratulations. Okay, let me see where we are.